Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brendan Slaughter here at BeaversEdge.com, joined by Beavers Edge writer, my main man, Ryan Harlan. We're coming to you guys with some breaking news here on this Thursday, December 19th. Appreciate all of y'all joining this edition of the podcast. What a day. I mean, Ryan, let's just start there. What a day. Obviously, we're not going to tease it any longer. Oregon State landed Duke quarterback Maalik Murphy this morning, one of the top quarterback options in the Rivals transfer portal and to transfer portal in general. Huge pickup for Trent Bray and co. And we're going to be breaking it all down. Also want to give credit to the other two transfers who announced today as well. BYU tight end Jackson Bowers, who I think has just loads of potential. Why he hasn't shown a whole lot at BYU yet. I mean, just a stud of a offer sheet coming out of high school. I think the Beavers got another steal there. And then another defensive line addition in Walker Harris from Southern Utah coming up. So Ryan and I will be breaking it all down, but obviously the big fish of the day was Malik, something we had been teasing to our Beavers Edge subscribers for, a couple weeks, Ryan. We've heard this chatter for a while, and really it goes back an entire year. And I think that is what the key to this whole thing is, because I've seen so many people who are not necessarily in the world of Oregon State football like you and I, Ryan, who are like, how did Oregon State get this done? How did they get this done? And Ryan and I will talk you guys through that a little bit. But most importantly, it was the fact that Maalik Murphy came to Corvallis a year ago, why he didn't commit that lasting impression that he had with Trent Bray and Gunderson. They left on a positive note. There weren't any hard feelings. It wasn't, oh, he went to Duke, we're not talking to him anymore. No, that line was kept open. Oregon State saw that payoff when they also had, resources to throw at Maalik Murphy as well. So we'll be diving into all of it. But Ryan, how did this come to be? Like, I mean, you and I had kind of talked about the possibility. We've mentioned it in our, quarterback hot boards now for, a week or so, but putting it out there and ink actually, I'm saying ink to paper. I'm not sure exactly what the deals are these days with NIL and whatnot, but just committed in the universe. Like he's coming to Oregon State. I'm curious where you rank this as far as possibilities coming into it, because I thought he was an outside chance, but again, I thought he was maybe too big of a fish for them to land nil-wise.
I kind of was in that same boat a little bit, but that was more of kind of like, hey, who are your options that are available that are like
Fair?
realistic?
Yeah.
And even too with like how NIL is played out, especially with what money the collective has, and
Right.
if it could get donors in there as well too to potentially help out. That's something where that was kind of always a big, I think, question mark for me, but it was never more of like, I don't think the door is completely closed on that either. That pre-existing relationship with Gunderson and Murphy's recruiting process, and then also too that visit from last year as well, I think kind of really helped sort of seal the deal.
Right.
And that relationship, I think, was probably really big in being able to get him here, because really Murphy didn't really need to take another visit to Corvallis if
Right.
he had
No,
taken
for
one
sure.
last year. And so that's something where that kind of shows that he really wanted to come here and consider this as a possibility, where it looked like, he could have gone to an SEC school like in Kentucky or in
Mhm.
Alabama. But those options kind of closed up as those schools have started to find their guys, or in some cases already have a guy in place already. And that's where I think, as the dominoes fell of the options that were available to Murphy, it looked more and more and more like he was going to land at Oregon State. And credit to Gunderson and also Bray too for keeping that line open and being
Yeah.
diligent in checking in.
Oh, for sure. And I think again, like we've heard and we've reported, and Ryan, we've talked about it as well. This is twofold, because nowadays, and I know that it's not everybody's preferred way of college football, but again, to quote, Matt Rule from about a year ago, the going rate for a good quarterback is probably a million plus. And
Yep.
again, I'm not saying that's what Oregon State, went into this process knowing, but Ryan, from what you and I heard, the potential nil dollars for the quarterback was in that seven figures range. And again, we have to credit supposedly some Oregon State boosters who kind of came together and said, hey, we're going to have a quarterback. And it's not hard to see why, Ryan, because when you look at Oregon State this last year, and I think it's one of the most fascinating questions, if they had consistent quarterback play and you had less turnovers, and let's just say you had Maalik Murphy's line from this last year, right? Almost 3,000 yards, 26 touchdowns, 12 picks. I get Oregon State had some holes this year, had some injuries. Injuries on the defensive side of the ball that had nothing to do with it. You have consistent quarterback play. Oregon State easily goes to a bowl game, Ryan. They probably win maybe two more games with how we saw. And I'm just curious, kind of your thoughts on how he can instantly just upgrade what me, and our old comrade TJ Mathewson just harped on for hours throughout the season, which was this team had a massive quarterback problem. And, you were at the forefront of that. You wrote a column for Beavers Edge right after the season. They need a quarterback. How much does this address those questions that you had? And honestly, like when you're fitting, the Tetris pieces together, you're kind of looking at Oregon State. You're like, man, if they could get a couple offensive linemen, couple more pieces here and there, you're kind of seeing what could be a pretty good team next year.
The biggest thing that I had going into this year was trying to grade the passing game, especially down the field, those deep shots, and those were some tough things to watch where it's like you just never saw a deep passing game, at least vertically, down the
Right.
field. And the times that you did, it worked out really well. You got some positive plays when you were able to connect on those plays. And I know particularly we saw that against Wazoo, where Ben was more aggressive and throwing down the field, but we had not seen that with Giovanni under center at all. And that was really something that I was looking forward at this entire season.
Hmm.
And that makes you a little less one-dimensional. Like we know the Beavers are going to run the ball. That's no question. But if teams can clue in on what you're doing and basically say, hey, we're going to stack the box against what you do really well and force you to throw over the top of us to try
Hmm.
and beat us defensively, and you can't do it, teams are going to continue to carry that over week to week when they face Oregon State. Now, with Murphy in there, you at least have a quarterback that can throw down the field, that can open up that game, especially with Trent Walker, Darius Clemens coming back, Bryce Caulfield as well, too, tight end spot, even Jackson
Yeah.
Bowers as well, the BYU tight end.
Yeah. No, of
So
course.
that's something where I think you'll at least see more of that going forward because that was one of the biggest things that I really was missing out on looking at this team last year, and I really couldn't give you a grade from it either. Like
Right.
really, it was an incomplete because of just the inconsistencies at the quarterback position.
Right. And again, I think it's also worth mentioning, Ryan, because everything you said spot on, and I think that, it will go down as one of the rougher years as far as quarterback play was. I mean, I think it would have looked a lot worse if Oregon State didn't get that dub against Washington State where, Bengal Branson had a really good game. And, for what it's worth, they even had some moments against Boise State. They closed the year out strong. But Ryan, I mean, we saw the lows, the Air Forces, the Cals, and that's why people thought, okay, there's some potential in the room. And one of the great questions we got asked at Beavers Edge on the damn board this week was, or actually today I should say, sorry, my sense of time, but was someone asked you, Ryan, like what happens to Jabari now? And I don't. I think the thought is like nothing. Like it's. I think if you were going to go into next year with Jabari as your starting quarterback, you would have probably expected another growing pains type year. I'm not saying the kid's not talented. You look at what he did in high school, everything else. I think the kid's got a lot of talent, but it's clear he still needs to grow, needs to develop. And I'm curious, kind of your thoughts on that too, because you were replying on the board today.
Yeah, the biggest thing I think for Jabari is like the talent's there. It's no question. Like the running talent is there. The arm talent is also there too.
Hmm.
But quarterback is not just I think a lot of people get a little too wrapped up in potential stars that a quarterback has. Part of that game is mental too, and that's something where Jabari needs to grow, and that will come with time in the passing game and going through his reads and progressions. That will come with time, but also I think too the coaching staff was going to go into this anyway, regardless of had Ben stayed, Giovanni stayed, and gone to the portal to bring in a guy. That's something where I kind of thought that that was going to be always the case, but I think that they're going to go into this season with the expectation of like, hey, like, we're going to bring in this guy, we're going to have him, and you compete for the starting job along with the rest of the quarterbacks in the room, and
Right.
it's up to you to show us what you've improved over the course of the offseason through spring ball and through fall camp.
Yeah. No,
So I think
and
that's what it's
for
going to
sure.
be. Like, I think that's something where, that's the healthy competition. And I think that's what Jabari was probably told in those off-season meetings.
Yeah, and kind of speaking of quarterback, because that's a great point to zoom in on here. I mean, again, Ryan mentioned it. While it hasn't been official, we expect Ben Gulbranson to kind of move on to the next stage of his life. Again, for how much it's kind of out there now, Ryan, I'm surprised he hasn't posted anything yet. But again, we're kind of waiting to see officially there. So when you consider that there were two quarterbacks leaving in the room, and then you consider now they have one coming in, and then also we're expecting Tristan Taia to join the program as well. That's two in, two outs. That probably means that they're set at quarterback, but with the new kind of walk on whole thing being shoved out of the way, I mean, Ryan, you think about like how much the walk-ons and even Jabari and those other guys were key practice players too. I wouldn't be shocked if they even look to add maybe even one more guy at that position just for depth. It'll be interesting. Maybe not. I could be purely speculating here. Not necessarily anyone who's going to come in and like compete, but just to kind of crank up the overall competition in the room. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean, and I think on one of the posts on the board, like there was one name that I floated out as a potential guy to be kind of a depth option than really
Mm-hmm.
anything else. Jack Lane from Idaho, but that was more of
Right.
like a kind of seeing what he was able to do this past
Sure.
season and being kind of intrigued by it, but also at the same time being more of like we don't know what the coaching staff is going to do at that position quite yet. But that was something more of like hey, you
Totally.
bring a guy in for some depth, raise the overall floor of the room as a whole with a guy that's done it before, at least while albeit at the
Right.
FCS competition level. But you saw what he was able to do at least against Oregon before he got injured.
Right.
So that was something for me where I was kind of like, you could take a flyer on a guy like that potentially if they do decide to add another quarterback.
And I'd also be remiss. I realize as well. Kalen Guttridge can't forget to mention
Yeah.
Kalen Guttridge as
Yeah.
well, who's also going to be in the mix. And again, completely just long day, a lot of quarterbacks. But even with Guttridge in there too, you look at it like barring something crazy like when Tristan Taia comes in, he's most likely going to redshirt. And then you've got Guttridge and coming off a redshirt year, and then Jabari with a little experience. So now that room may be set, but again, when you look at it last year, Ryan, they graduated Jake Sanders and Dom Montiel. Those guys did, again, while most fans are not going to see those guys as value, we saw those guys as value constantly. The Beavers didn't just have those guys doing nothing. They were doing key practice reps. So I wonder if that means more reps for the quarterbacks there, and maybe they just shrink the room with the roster limit. So that's going to be something to kind of keep an eye on. So again, that's Oregon State's quarterbacks room as we know it now, with Murphy leading the way, Jabari Johnson, and then Kalen Guttridge, and then most likely Tristan Taia joining the room as well. But real quick, Ryan, I want to take a look just so Beaver fans can take their victory lap. So in the Rivals transfer portal, Maalik Murphy is the 25th best player overall, and there are only a few quarterbacks ahead of him. Only John Mateer, who is the top overall player in the portal per Rivals. Jackson Arnold, also pretty darn good player. Fernando Mendoza, we think we know where he's going to end up. Pretty good player too. And then Darian Mensah, who went from Tulane to Duke. So again, the little in and out, in and out. Again, it's not quite like you go back to Maalik Murphy in high school, coming out of California. You talk about the familiarity with Ryan Gunderson, as you mentioned, Ryan, and coming out of Sarah High School down there. he wasn't, as far as like this is not like a DJU type recruit. He wasn't like the mecca of the top of his class or anything like that. But nevertheless, four-star recruit. Rivals top 250, came in as the 129th best player at Rivals, and a top 10 quarterback, most importantly. And obviously started at Texas, didn't last there very long, went to Duke, and I think about the fit, Ryan, like maybe he and Oregon State weren't right for each other last year. Like you think about like the timing of everything, like Trent Bray was new, Ryan Gunderson was new. We didn't really know what the Beaver team was going to look like. Maalik Murphy was kind of an unproven commodity. He were like, he could be good. He could also just not still need more time to develop, right? But now you flash forward a year. He's proven it at Duke. The Beavers now have proven, hey, we're kind of a quarterback away from getting to be, where we want to be. A couple other pieces too, but as we mentioned, quarterback being the whole this year. I think it's almost like, for lack of better terms, the perfect marriage at the perfect time. And that old kind of saying, like, timing is everything, Ryan. And, maybe it wasn't the right idea to pop the question last year. You had to pop the question now. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, and also too with the schedule at the time and the way things were kind of in
Mm-hmm.
flux as well
Yes,
too.
yes,
And I
so
think
much.
that was something that
Great
probably
point.
maybe kind of gave him a little apprehension to
Mm-hmm.
commit to Oregon State last year. But now Beavers have a set schedule that's pretty competitive, that's pretty solid, especially first few games of the season before they kind of get into the bit of easier part kind of the schedule in like the middle
Sure.
of the season. So I think that's something where it's like a pretty decent schedule that's been set forward pretty well, and having that plus a kind of another year under his belt, I think he's more willing this time around than he probably was last year around this time.
Yeah. And again, we're going to be diving into kind of Malik and some of his more advanced stats for sure. But just a tease for you guys to check out at BeaversEdge.com. We're going to be diving into his PFF stats. And, one of the things that was really indicative of Oregon State's struggles this year was, the PFF numbers. And, you go look at Maalik Murphy, and he's, one of the top Duke offensive players as far as advanced numbers this last year. So that's exciting. You're also getting a player who probably still has not hit his ceiling, right? I mean, you're talking about the situation that he was in, obviously, being at Duke after being at Texas, and, you're going to learn something new from a different staff everywhere. But one thing I wanted to ask you, Ryan, is based on what he brings to the table, right? 6'5", 230 pounds. He is a pro style quarterback. But you look at it, he's an athletic guy. And, you look at his numbers, didn't really get a chance to run the ball much at Texas, but at Duke, he took 19 carries. It was negative yards, but finished with 2 touchdowns. I wonder if in Ryan Gunderson's kind of spread attack, I'm sitting here thinking, like, what could a read option RPO look like with him and Anthony Hankerson next year? Like, I really think that Gundy's offense could maybe, I'm not going to say he's going to turn into a mobile guy, but when you're that big and as athletic as he is and quick, he almost could maybe run some old Jack Coletto type stuff as far as like being a short yardage guy, which there were times the Beavers needed that kind of short yardage package this year, and you saw it was like Jake Reichel, for instance. And not saying Jake Reichel wasn't adept for that role, I think he was, but like you kind of needed some more of that short yardage kind of dynamo this year, if that makes sense.
No, I know what you mean. Kind of similar to what DJU did a
Yes.
couple times in the 2023 season. But also, like speaking of speed, somebody on the board dropped his 40 time. It's a 4.6. So he's
Yeah,
got
he
some
can
mobility.
move.
He can move. Probably that's more like a 4.5 if I had to guess in game speed.
Sure.
I don't like 40 times don't quite tell you everything, but like
Sure.
if you kind of see that from a prospect, it's usually like take a second less off their actual 40 time for what it might be in game. And for kind of reference, Josh Allen ran a 4.7.
Gotcha. Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's something where like,
Quick. Yeah.
yeah, so he's got legs, he's got mobility, so he can move when needed, and I think maybe that's what Ryan Gunderson's kind of looking for out of his
I
quarterback.
agree.
Not like a true dual threat, but maybe more of a guy that's more that pro style that has the mobility to move and pick up yards with his legs if needed, if
Yes.
called upon to do so. And I know a knock that a lot of people had on Ben when he was starting this past season was the mobility. Like
Right.
that
You're
was the
right.
big thing. And it's like, yeah, Ben can pick you up yards when he can, but he's not, he was not the speed of like a Jabari or a Giovanni by any means with what they were able to do athleticism wise. And that's okay. But like that's something where I think maybe going forward, that's probably what Gunderson is looking for out of his quarterbacks.
Right. And that's it's interesting too because, obviously you know, everything you said, as far as what Gundy's looking for. And, I kind of go back and look too, Ryan. The other thing you can't discount about what Murphy's going to bring to the table too is the Beavers are getting somebody with really good experience now, too. A really, like, again, say what you will, but one of Ryan and I's big concerns is like, hey, and again, this is not throwing shade at Giovanni McCoy, but when you take a guy from FCS to FBS, we saw there can be a learning curve. And sometimes it just doesn't quite fit. And, you look at what Murphy played this last year. I know he didn't beat them, but he played two ranked teams, went into overtime against SMU, also played against Miami, but went 9-3. And you look like North Carolina, Florida State, Georgia Tech, North Carolina State, Virginia Tech, Wake Forest. Wake Forest, common opponent for next year, right? So I think when you look at how the Beavers' schedule stacks up this year, that's a guy who's going to be ready for pretty much every game they got next year. As far as just the not having too big of a learning curve, and I think if he can kind of pick up the offense, which we've heard compared to previously, Ryan Gunderson's offense is a little easier to pick up quickly as far as not being a really intense offense. If he can pick it up quickly, I could really see Murphy being able to hit the ground running with this team, Ryan. I mean, we talked about it. You now got a new target at tight end in Bowers. Obviously, you bring back out, Mr. Dual Threat, both sides of the ball, Andy Alfieri, a couple other guys as well. And then you got, Clemens and Trent Walker back, some more pieces. Jimmy Valson going to be back. Like, you get a couple offensive linemen, and you've got Hank back. You've got Salahadin. Like, you're starting to kind of see it, Ryan. Like, defenses, we'll worry about that for a different pod. But offensively, they go get a couple transfer offensive linemen, maybe one more tight end for some extra, more experience. You could see Murphy having a good group of guys to get the ball to next year.
Oh yeah, even too, like not even just tight end as well, probably even a receiver as well too.
Right.
Maybe depending on what happens with that room, maybe like kind of a depth guy, maybe a
Go
guy
grab. Yeah, I
that's a
mean,
little
maybe
more,
somebody wants to come play with Murphy, right? You never
yeah,
know.
a little more experience. Probably a guy who could be, sort of that third option in the slot a little bit more, kind of be able to take the top off of defense potentially. That's
Right.
another option kind of out there, and maybe getting an offensive lineman, maybe more of a guy at tackle potentially, kind of what I was kind of thinking maybe a little bit there. I
Yeah.
know Strand is going to come back and fill that spot. Tyler Morano is also going to come back
Hmm.
from his injury, but don't know obviously where he is or how far along he is yet from the whole rehab process. But a guy potentially there maybe to shore some things up. I kind of like already some of the depth that they do have there in the room, but
Yeah.
maybe getting a guy that can kind of play multiple different positions, kind of like Grant Stark did a little bit as well too. A
Right.
guy that's played all over along the offensive line, you can kind of plug and play anywhere along there, depending on what Devan wants to do with that room next season. I know obviously Van Wells is going to slot back in at center. Tyler Volton's going to come back and probably play guard again
Yeah.
as well. So it's figuring out where those other pieces kind of lie along that offensive line.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because, like, so far I think it's kind of two different guys. You look at a guy like Keon Cox coming in from UCF, terrific size for a youngster, but he hasn't played much, right? He's probably going to
Mhm.
be a guy who they develop and season a little bit. Again, not putting any expectations, but just assuming. And then you have a guy like JT Hand from Arizona who has played. I expect Han to come in and, if he's healthy, be able to compete for one of those spots too, Ryan. Probably we're on the other guard side of the ball, or other guard side of the line, I should say. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. But you missed a couple big guys in Gerard and Grant Stark. And talk about Gerard being obviously the conference offensive lineman of the year, one of Oregon State's, I believe he's one of their highest graded players. Gerard had a great year, and it's one of those things where Oregon State will need to replace. As you mentioned, there are guys with some experience, but I wonder if in this new transfer portal world, they will go look to get somebody like Grant Stark, who had started for Nevada for, years, and some change kind of a thing. So that will be something key to watch out as well. But no, Ryan, real quick, we'll obviously finish on Murphy, but I want to also mention it. We did earlier Jackson Bowers. This was not just Murphy's day. Oregon State landed a whole lot of athletes today, as we mentioned the tight end from BYU, Jackson Bowers, former three-star. This guy had so many offers out of high school, Ryan. You go look at his offer sheet. This guy was wanted by a lot of teams, and I think despite, really not getting a true chance to show what he could do at BYU, maybe he takes a year, but regardless, I think he's going to be a nice fit for Oregon State when he kind of develops and can get into that system. And then also got to throw in, like we said, Walker Harris as well. Don't know as much about Walker Harris. We'll admit, he comes from Southern Utah. Before that was at Sioux Falls, so has definitely played his way up throughout. And you got to love guys like that, Ryan, because they're hungry, right? He started out at a Division II school, I believe, with Sioux Falls. Shout out Kalen DeBoer, and then you obviously work your way up to Southern Utah and had a pretty good year. And if he can make that leap, kind of going from that FCS level to FBS level and be an effective rusher for the Beavs, that would be nice. But overall, Ryan, and I tweeted this out, this has got to rank amongst, take out whole signing days where you're signing, 15, 20, 25 guys. This has got to be one of the more impactful days in Oregon State football in recent memory. I mean, obviously DJ committing was huge for what that team needed at the time. And I don't want to compare the two and say this is bigger or that one was bigger, but it feels at that same wavelength. Like, this is really what Oregon State needed. Trent Bray, and got to mention this, there was a lot of criticisms for offensive coordinator Ryan Gunderson as the year went along. And I'll admit, even I sometimes was like, what's going on here? And that's to be understood for a first-year offensive coordinator. Make no mistake, folks. It was Gundy that pushed this across the finish line. Obviously, beyond all the other stuff, when you're talking coaching, relationships, Trent Bray made his trade as a defensive coach. Gundy got this over the finish line. I really believe that, Ryan. And I think this is his kind of like, take your bow, and maybe his kind of message. Hey, Beaver fans, I can go get a quarterback.
Yeah, no, and even too, like the fact of like they landed guys at key positions of need in the offseason is huge. And especially too for getting Walker Harris, like, yes, I know Southern Utah, I know people probably will discount that maybe a little bit, but at the same time though, that's a position of need. Like, we saw what happened without the lack of depth along the defensive line and what happened in the pass rush there. So it's like huge. And even to credit to Gundy for keeping that relationship alive. I mean, recruiting is not just more of like, the X's and O's part and bringing in high profile guys. It's the relationships that you build. And that's also partly why the Beavers were able to land Darius Clemens last offseason.
Yep.
Was
I remember
because
that.
of the relationship with Coach Hinson.
Yep.
That is exactly what those are. And that's huge for Gundy being able to do that.
And in a place like Oregon State where maybe you're not going to have the biggest bag of money, right? And I know people might roll their eyes, but that's just where college football is trending, for better or for worse. You have to have a niche, something, and culture and relationships is something that Oregon State can utilize, Ryan, in those discussions and say, hey, maybe we can't offer you quite the top level, but we can offer you a top level and a really fun place to be. We're going to take care of you. This is going to be, and why it may sound, quote, like cheesy or whatever, that stuff does matter, and we see relationships matter. And, to your point, also got to mention Tajay Mullix, the other defensive line addition, that's going to be joining the Beavers as well, and coming over from Western Carolina. So you got to give the Beavers credit across the board, whether it's the offensive lineman we mentioned, the defensive lineman, the tight end, now Maalik Murphy. Like, it's been a solid transfer portal so far for the Beavers. And really outside of, losing a few guys, again, lost Isaiah Chisholm, Melvin Jordan, Andre Jordan, a few guys, and that's going to happen to most teams in an offseason. You have to be impressed with how the Beavers have handled the portal so far. We'll see as they continue to go. But really, outside of a few deflections, Ryan, and Thomas Ford, which again, credit to Thomas Ford. Absolutely go take a head coach job when it's there, going back to Idaho. There hasn't been a whole lot of negatives for Oregon State this postseason, Ryan, and or off season, I should say. And I think that's kind of a credit to Bray's culture and what he's built, and that should give Beaver fans a lot of excitement for the off season spring football and the next season to come.
Oh, absolutely. And two, you can never fault a guy for taking a head coaching gig
No, yeah,
as well.
congrats,
Like,
yeah.
yeah, no, of course.
But they'll
And
have to
the
replace
biggest,
him, so we'll see.
yeah, that's going to be a thing. And I love talking to Coach Ford during those availabilities and
Yeah.
getting to see him work too. Like, I'm like all when I saw that news break, I was like, hey, like, good for you. Go crush it at Idaho. Like,
Yeah.
I'll be keeping an eye on what you do next season. So really cool, really awesome dude in general to be around. And I think the Vandals are gonna be able to keep a lot of guys from this past roster and being able to carry over what Jason Eck was able to do in his time at Idaho before going to UNM.
Yeah,
So
it's the portal, just the domino effect, right? It's like, oh, Bronco Mendenhall goes to Utah State. Okay. New Mexico hires Jason Eck. Okay. Idaho, hires Thomas Ford, kind of a thing. So, it really is, showing how the dominoes can go. But stay locked to BeaversEdge.com here in the next day. Before the busy day that we had today, we were going to get our first RB coach hot board out there, but we'll be able to get that out here in the next day or two. Some potential candidates that, Oregon State could be looking at. Could there be a reunion with a former coach? Maybe they go tap an alumni. Oregon State obviously has a lot of really famous alumni at the position too, who could draw a lot of clout in this NIL world that we're in now too. So lots of options for Trent Bray and offensive coordinator Ryan Gunderson with the running back coach position. So that'll go ahead and wrap up this edition of the Edge podcast. But next, definitely make sure to stay tuned to Beavers Edge, to Ryan Harlan on Twitter, myself on Twitter, and obviously Dylan Kelly and Crowley as well, as we're going to continue to bring you guys more coverage of Oregon State's offseason. Ryan and I will continue to see what portal additions come from the next day or two. Something we can kind of tease. We're hearing good things from TJ Crandall, West Virginia defensive back in the portal. We'll kind of see how that comes together here in the next day or so. But overall, Ryan, big day for the Beavers, and a pretty good one for them to build on heading into Christmas.
oh yeah, absolutely. It's an early Christmas present
Oh,
this
without a
time
doubt.
around for Beaver Nation, and I can't complain about that. It's made my day a little more
Yeah,
exciting with all this news. So I can't complain, to be quite honest with you. But yeah, we're just waiting
exciting.
on to see what happens with Crandall going
Yeah,
forward. So likely something tomorrow if I had to guess, but
there you
that's just
go.
more putting a timetable on it.
Yeah, keep an eye out, Beaver Nation, and definitely keep tabs on Ryan, myself, and Dylan, and everyone over at BeaversEdge.com. If you're not yet a Beavers Edge subscriber, we got a great deal. Head on over to the front page. You can join free for 30 days. Just use the promo code 30Beavers. Get in, get all the stuff from Ryan and I. We definitely have a lot to offer you guys. So, thanks again for tuning into this edition of the Edge podcast. For Ryan Harlan, this is Brendan Slaughter signing off. Stay tuned to BeaversEdge.com.